So let us talk about the court battle to come. Maybe really quite a battle. The Cabinet Office this afternoon. Henry Zeffman, our own Henry Zeffman, told us about this while we were on air on Drive. The government seeking a judicial review of the COVID inquiry chair, Baroness Hallett's order to hand over the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's stack of WhatsApp messages and his diaries and his notebooks, dozens of them, covering the pandemic. It was after the passing of a 4 p.m. deadline to do that. Then we got the news the government's going to take this thing to court and fight its corner there. And Rachel, even since then, just quite recently this evening, we've also been hearing slightly more complications, which is that the former Prime Minister has got a phone with potentially another stack of WhatsApps on them, which we haven't even heard about yet.
Which he's been told, he says, by the security services he had to turn off for the national security reasons. So there's a whole load of other WhatsApps that he hasn't handed over. But he's now apparently asking with MI6 or MI5 whether they can unlock this phone in order to safely download all these WhatsApps. So he's trying to be very open and transparent, apparently.
Okay.
But there just seems to be one twist after another to this story. Our colleague George Grills has tweeted some extraordinary questions that Baroness Hallett has put to Boris Johnson in a letter on February the 3rd. So she says, in relation to the response to COVID-19, did you have any concerns regarding the performance of any cabinet minister between January 22 and February 22? Did you receive advice from the then cabinet secretary that Matt Hancock should be removed from his position? Baronet Hallett asks Boris Johnson. To what extent did you believe that coronavirus was akin to influenza? Did you hold and express the initial view that COVID-19 was not a serious threat? Why did you not attend any COBRA meetings in relation to COVID-19 prior to 2nd of March 2022, given the seriousness of the emergency? So you get a sense of the tone and her approach to this inquiry. She is not going to be
She's really diving into the weeds.
Yeah.
It's not just about the policy, but also the background politics.
Absolutely.
And whether the Prime Minister was upset with this or that
Which
minister.
she has to do. If she's going to do a proper inquiry, she has to look at all aspects of it.
It's quite alarming, Isabel, isn't it? We knew, because we've heard the testimony from other leading lawyers, including her fellow former judges, that she's a judge to be reckoned with. But she's taking this job very seriously and in great detail.
Yeah, so it's funny because when a government sets up an inquiry, there are always questions about whether it's going to be, a whitewash, sort of patsy. Now, this is obviously an independent public inquiry, but it is very clear now, as Rachel said, that that's not going to be the case, that it's not going to be an inquiry that ministers are going to find comfortable, and nor should it be. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is that the length of time these public inquiries take is such that actually most of these players, the sort of fight you're having that you've got with the Cabinet Office at the moment, between the Cabinet Office and the inquiry over these messages. I mean, it's a sideshow to the real question, which is, will this inquiry report at a pace that means that the people who were making the decisions are held accountable? Will it report at a pace that means that actually future mistakes aren't made? Because if you look at the classic example of an inquiry that took too long and that people were largely able to ignore is the Iraq inquiry, that took so long to report that most of its main players had left government. And you had Tony Blair on the day that Chilcot reported, giving a press conference where he basically just invited journalists to ask him questions until they died. And he will spend the rest of his life, I think, ruminating on whether that was the right decision. But most of the players in that had sort of exited the political arena entirely. And I suspect that may well be the case with this COVID inquiry as well.
And what's worse is that there may be another pandemic in the meantime, and we won't have had the inquiry results in order to learn the lessons. And the worry with this legal challenge is that it delays the whole thing still further.
Yeah. That is actually the most pointed question of all. I mean, given the point of this is to arm ourselves better for the next pandemic, and there seems to be a common view when you track these debates closely, Rachel. There's a common view that there will be another one. It's just a question of time, and it's been argued since the pandemic, which was not that very long ago, that we've actually gone backwards in our preparedness for the next one, and years on top of that. Well, goodness me. And Isabel, your point is also, I think, a pretty sharp one. This is going to take years. We're hearing about 5, 6, 7 years. You mentioned the Iraq inquiry. I can remember the Franks Commission on the Falklands. By the time that report came out, it was a history book. It belonged in a history lecture.
Yeah, and the problem with the pandemic is the next pandemic would not be history. It would be real life, very, hard to deal with. And it's crucial that we know what went wrong and what we should do differently.
And this question of delay, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this process is going to play out in any depth at all. But there's now to be a judicial review. Now, I don't know how long that will take to get to the High Court. It'll take a while. But after that, is there also the possibility of taking the thing to the highest court, to the Court of Appeal? I mean, given the sounds that we're hearing from former Supreme Court justices, that would seem to be an exercise in futility. And I think you need leave to do that anyway. But we haven't got there yet. One can imagine this going on for some considerable time. And it doesn't have to go on for years, this pre-process. You get, a few months down the line and you're in the run-up to a general election. And things start getting suspended for that reason.
I think it's interesting where this is all coming from. So it seems politically so foolish for Rishi Sunak to do this, because it looks like he's trying to cover up, especially given Boris Johnson effectively laying down the gauntlet to him by offering up all his WhatsApps, or the ones he claims he can. So you sort of wonder, cui bono in the way old sort of crime novel thing, who benefits from this, and conversely, who suffers most from the WhatsApps coming out. And you just have to wonder whether the civil service are actually at fault more than politicians on this. So who is really worried about the WhatsApps that come out?
Yeah.
I think is quite interesting. A combination of all of them.
I mean, the civil service culture.
Who's worried
the
about?
The less information we give out, the better.
Yeah.
And then there's a question of maybe guarding the present Prime Minister's back, which he may not be. I'm making this up. I'm putting fuel on the fire of the conspiracy theory. Maybe they're trying to have that, at least subconsciously, at the back of their minds. Let's look after the Prime Minister, because these WhatsApps may not be great for him. And then you've got Boris Johnson there. And by the way, Boris Johnson, he can of course sound all in favour of massive transparency now, because it doesn't matter what he says. It's going to play out quite irrespective of what he does. So why not take the part of being the man in favour of greater transparency?
Well, he sort of realised that they will be forced to hand them over eventually. That's what's so odd about the Whitehall decision, government decision, because almost certainly they will end up having to do it.
Do you think Whitehall and government, mentioned both those things because they're as one, have they got in too deep? Is this now counterproductive, do you think?
As Rachel said, they're just going to have to U-turn at some point, whether it's, all the legal opinions that everyone has sought. And Henry Zeffman was on your programme earlier, quoting various legal experts who he'd spoken to, have said that Baroness Hallett is on really strong legal ground here. So one way or t'other, there's going to have to be a U-turn. And the only reason I can think of for doing this is as a delaying tactic, which comes back to the point we were discussing a few minutes ago about people not learning the lessons when they need to, and actually this reporting much later than it should, which I suspect has got a lot to do with it. But it is strange, and I can hear the sort of disbelief in all three of our voices. I think that Boris Johnson is the one sort of meeting deadlines and trying to be as helpful and transparent as possible. This is not normal.
He's more politically savvy, so he realises which way the wind's blowing. And he just knows it's politically smart to get ahead of it.
Yeah, it was only a week ago that we heard the Prime Minister being furious, or the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson being furious about the idea of handing over these documents. It was described as a threat to national security. It was all part of, and this was on the record, his own spokesman saying in a statement on the record, it was a politically motivated operation. And now, of course, there's Boris Johnson, and we're all entitled to change our minds, telling us that this is a very good thing for transparency, handed all over.
Politically motivated operation to embarrass Rishi Sunak, I think, in this case, by Boris Johnson.
Well, who knows? You may not be far off with that one. Now, here's some evidence of the effects of this so far. Just this this afternoon while we've been on air here. It's a poll by the polling organisation YouGov, and it tells us about the effect that this latest saga has had on confidence in the COVID-19 inquiry. And here are the numbers. These are striking. A great deal of confidence. How many people have a great deal of confidence on this poll? 4% of people. What about a fair amount of confidence? 20%. When you ask the question, do you have not very much confidence in the COVID inquiry now? The answer was 39%. And no confidence at all, 21%.
That's terrifying, isn't it?
It's
And
extraordinary.
it's absolutely imperative that she does get all these documents that she wants in order for the public to have confidence. The public has to have confidence in this inquiry. It's an inquiry for the public. It's not an inquiry for the politicians.
And those numbers are extraordinary, aren't they, Isabel?
Yeah, they are. And I think there's there is a long-term problem here as well in terms of public confidence, just in the way that government handles these big moments like COVID, like other disasters. I think we all accepted the claim in March 2020 that this was unprecedented, unexpected, and so on. I mean, if you listen to emergency planners, I'm thinking of Lucy Easthope, who's an emergency planner who's written a lot on different emergencies that she has to plan for. She was saying, no, actually, we did plan for this, and this is a political narrative that it wasn't planned for. It's just that the politicians didn't choose to make the decisions and to fund the things that were necessary in advance of a pandemic like this. And I don't think the public will get fooled again on that.
Yeah. Well, look, here's one of our listeners. It's David in Grimsby. Thank you for texting in, David, who does see in this a plan to do down Boris Johnson. This is David's thought. This inquiry is already looking like a sham, says David. The ability of future governments to have any form of healthy internal debate by microanalyzing WhatsApps, which can easily be taken out of context as a soundbite, looks in danger. Democratic debate and thinking is seriously in danger. Kill democracy to bury Boris? ? Well, that is David in Grimsby's thought. Bit of support there for the Boris Johnson end of the conversation.
So there is a serious question about whether it undermines policy making, and ministers and their civil servants have to be able to have honest conversations with each other. The problem is, I think, that then don't have those conversations on WhatsApp. They have those conversations in a walk in St James's Park. If you're worried that something is going to come out,
is that
you
where
shouldn't.
we want to be, Rachel? I mean, I share your concern about policy making being harmed, being chilled down by the idea of exposure sooner or later. If it chills down considered reflection on policy between officials and ministers, that's not a great thing. Or a minister maybe should be able to say, something bitchy to a minister about another minister without fear of that ending up on the front page of the papers. But is this the answer? Is that it should happen in St James's Park?
As soon as it's written down on a WhatsApp, rather than in a sort of proper formal minute, you leave yourself open to that. Yeah. And I think that is to do with the sort of growing informality of policy making, and actually the undermining of the civil service and the undermining of those proper structures and proper meetings and committees and minutes is what's led to this, because it's done on the sort of fly on WhatsApp.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.